Hey, everybody, and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not News, your favorite podcast about fake news. I'm Beth.
I'm Kelly.
Hey, Kelly, how's it going today?
Pretty good. How are you, Beth?
I'm doing good. I've been hearing some news about people not liking the term fake news anymore. Have you heard about that?
I hadn't heard any of it, but I would rather be concerned about there not being any more fake news. I would be more concerned about the actuality of fake news than worrying about hearing the term.
Yeah, I obviously I may be a little bit biased, but our concern here is with actual fake news and stomping that out. And so I think a lot of people, when they say they don't like the term fake news anymore, they're actually talking about the reference of fake news in regards to actual reporting. So the way that DJT refers to fake news whenever somebody says something he doesn't like. Yes, that is a problem, and that shouldn't be called fake news. But there is actual still fake news out there that still has to be addressed. And so here we go.
That's what we're here for,
That's
right? All right. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about today. So first, I wanted to just real quick do the song of the episode. We started that last time. And this time I feel like the song that embodies this episode is Draw Your Swords by Angus and Julia Stone. And not necessarily for what the lyrics embody, but the title. In that writers, sometimes when they draw their swords, they're drawing their pens out to write. And they sometimes refer to those as swords. But it's a very hauntingly beautiful song. And so if you do want to listen to it, to just have a nice little escape, it has nothing to do with fake news. But it's one of my old favorites. So,
and I really enjoyed it when you sent it to me.
Oh, did you listen?
Earlier this week. Yes, I did.
Nice. Now, do you have a book for our listeners this week?
I do. I decided that this week I would read the much acclaimed Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff.
What?
And maybe we could, I know, right? And we could take some time and talk about it because it is bananas for real.
Nice.
Yeah. So Michael Wolff, as you know, he was a former journalist, more of a freelance journalist for places like USA Today and The Guardian. He claims that he has over 200 interviews with White House staff and multiple members of the administration. After reading this, I'm going to say that most of those interviews were definitely with Steve Bannon. That is probably a good 40 to 50% of this book is sourced from Steve Bannon.
Wow. So
yeah,
this book brings up a really good question. And that is, can we trust a book, or can books be fake news? And
what do you think, Beth?
I have a lot of thoughts on this, and part of it goes to who the book is talking to. So Steve Bannon is not super high on my list of people that I trust. So if
I don't know what you're talking about. He's an incredibly trustworthy individual.
I mean, okay, like if I was going to embody Austin Powers, Dr. Evil, is that who it was? And try to take over the world? Maybe Steve Bannon would be my guy. But other than that, I'm not sure that he's the person that I would go to for information. He was, of course, in the White House and part of the campaign for Donald Trump. So yes, he was there. And so there is something to be said for the fact that who can we trust in that White House to give us good information? So, there's going to be that problem no matter where you go. But I'm really curious. I didn't read the book, so I'm really curious to hear about it from you. And then I think we should talk about this, about our books. Can books be fake news, and what can you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should have that discussion. I do want to remind anyone who might not know that, Steve Bannon did make millions off of being a producer, buying rights to things in Hollywood, especially to things he didn't actually have anything to do with. Like, that's how he made his money through Seinfeld. But, next time you think that Steve Bannon's a smart guy, let's all remember that he made a documentary on Sarah Palin called The Undefeated. That's not ironic. and made another documentary called The Torchbearer about Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty fame.
Oh, that's right.
And that one got a whole 1.7 stars out of 10 on IMDb. Really highly acclaimed director here. Because those are the things he's writing and directing himself.
Yeah.
That's what his production company does, is they make these propaganda films. I want to keep that in mind as we talk about what he's doing.
Okay,
because he's still doing
just say
those
really
films
quick
now.
though, is Steve Bannon making those films because he believes that that's a message that needs to get out there, or is that just an avenue for money laundering?
That's a good point.
I mean, 'cause seriously,
I honestly, I think that he takes a lot of stock in people like Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch, who saw that hole in the market in media, in film, in TV news that wasn't there for the right-wing people who would be more right-leaning. Right. I had no idea until I read this book, but apparently it's much better known than I knew. But I had no idea, and one of the revelations to me was that Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch did not like each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I figured they're on the same side. Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News.
Right.
He is pretty right-wing himself, but to him, Roger Ailes was crazy pants. He was crazy pants right-wing.
Wow.
And he kind of saw him as a problem that was the reason that Fox News went so far. So that was an interesting revelation.
Does a Murdoch not realize or want Fox News to go that far? I mean,
it didn't really make that clear. It just made it really apparent that they did not agree with one another. They're both, Ailes has passed away.
Right.
No more really needs to be said about that sexist, crazy maniac. But, Murdoch is still around, and there's a lot of people who will say that Murdoch will he didn't always just go right wing. Like he donated to Hillary Clinton in certain campaigns. Like he will put money into wherever he can make money. And he saw that hole in the market, and he is more right leaning, but he was never as far right as someone like Roger Ailes.
Oh, interesting.
The disgusting,
disgusting
old man.
Didn't Michael Wolff also do a book about Murdoch?
He may have. You know what? The one thing I didn't do when I was looking into Michael Wolff is I didn't look at his other books. I really should have.
I think it was him, because he wasn't happy about it. Murdoch was Wolff followed him around for a long time, and they were friends, and he gave him all his access, and Murdoch was not happy with the outcome that came out of that.
Was it a book on?
Yeah.
It was a book on Rupert Murdoch?
Yeah, let me look it up real quick.
Yeah, I don't know. I know he must have been friends with Roger Ailes, because Michael Wolff had the dinner party that's revealed at the beginning of the book.
Yes.
Where Steve Bannon and Roger Ailes gave so much information that just starts the book out with a very, it starts this shocking thing where you really realize that these people might be backing Trump, but they certainly don't respect him.
Yeah, it was called The Man Who Owns the News: Inside the Secret World of Rupert Murdoch by Michael Wolff. And Rupert Murdoch took issue with it, for sure. I don't think I don't think they're friends anymore. We'll put it that way.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Rupert Murdoch is not a source. He's mentioned a couple of times, but only in terms of, say, people talking about something he said. There's one point where he's quoting Rupert Murdoch calling Trump a fucking idiot, but it's sourced from someone saying that he called them and said that he was a fucking idiot.
I've said that.
Or he was at a dinner party. Yeah. I've said it too. So I feel like, how do you know whether or not you've said that Trump is a fucking idiot? I mean, it could slip out at a
drop of a hat.
Point. I mean,
anytime.
I mean, I actually wrote down some of the quotes that people who were either former or still Trump advisors that have called the president Gary Cohn has called him dumb as shit. Steve Mnuchin and Reince Priebus have called him an idiot. Rupert Murdoch has called him a fucking idiot. H.R. McMaster has called him a dope. Katie Walsh has called him a child, although she denies that. But seriously.
Really?
It's not an uncommon term
to
have heard. I mean, we hear that it's basically an adult daycare in the White House.
Right.
And Thomas Barrack Jr., who has also come out and said he didn't say this, but he, in the book, is quoted as saying not only crazy, but he's stupid as well.
So we've definitely heard people saying, I didn't say that. Michael Wolff made this up. Things aren't true.
Well, not most people.
What do you think?
I think Steve Bannon has come out and apologized.
Right.
But he has not denied one thing he said in this book. You know, I read it and I felt really gross because I have this sort of begrudging respect for Steve Bannon. The same way that you can have begrudging respect for certain people who you can look at them and say, I may not like what you do, but you at least stand by your convictions.
I'm sorry, I just blacked out there for a second. Did you say you have respect for Steve Bannon?
I have a really disgustingly, begrudgingly tiny bit of respect. Just a tiny shred. Only because this book is, wasn't like it was published 2 days ago. But yet some of the revelations that are coming out this past week. He's not super dumb when it comes to politics, which makes sense because he's been in this game for a long time. He's been watching politics. He knows how to withstand the ebb and flow. But what I saw in this book and what I saw in not just him, but in Michael Wolff and also in Trump is that these are very arrogant men. These are the men who walk into the room and automatically assume that they are the smartest people there and they can get everyone else to do what they want to do. And I am going to take a cross-stitch project that I saw recently, and I'm going to make it and hang it in my office for every time we do our podcast. And it says, grant me the confidence of mediocre white men, because Lord help me, Beth. These men who don't seem to be able to, Trump can barely string a sentence together, and he is our president. And that was a pure confidence game. When they call him a con man, that is because he thinks that he is so much better than everyone else. And yet we see very clearly that I'm not even sure that he wanted this job.
Right.
That's one of the things they talk about in the book that I had completely forgotten. And that was one of the things that really made me stop and pause because so much happens. We're living on a 5-minute news cycle at the moment. You wake up in the morning, you check your news. I'm checking the news so many times a day that I have to take breaks and I have to turn off my notifications at a certain point because I can't do it anymore. I'm making myself crazy. But these guys have been doing this since the campaign. And some of this stuff is so out there bonkers bullshit. And we've completely forgotten about it because it's just on with the next crazy news cycle.
But there's only so much room in your brain for crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like I had completely forgotten about Hope Hicks having an affair with Corey Lewandowski. And then after they broke up, getting in a screaming match on the street in front of reporters. This is a woman that is his communications director. She should know how to be discreet.
True. But I don't think she was the communications director at that time. I think she's the third director. There was that first guy whose name we don't know. So apparently he just did his job or something. And then we had the star, Anthony Scaramucci. He burned bright and he burned fast.
He's another one that didn't know how to be discreet.
No, he did not.
He also didn't know how to tell anybody that something was off the record.
Oh my gosh, I forgot all about that. That call. Oh my gosh.
You forgot about...
It's like a walk through memory lane.
Yeah. No one there seems to know how to make remarks off the record.
No, but Hope Hicks, she was named the interim director and then she was appointed the communications director like a few months later. And she's been in that position ever since. So I don't know. I guess the third time is a charm.
Right. And there are tiny little things that are in this book that give you they're not things that you really feel like this can't be fake. Like, it can't be fake that Hope Hicks is the one who keeps arranging these meetings with Maggie Haberman, these interviews. Now, it is conjecture on the part of Wolff to say that the reason he keeps doing these interviews is because he's still seeking the praise of the New York populace, because that's his home base and because that's where he grew up. And he's always wanted to be part of that in crowd. And he always was part of that in crowd, even if people were laughing at him. But he still wants that New York Times approval, and he never gets it. But Hope Hicks is the one who keeps arranging these interviews. And
so it sounds like you have some truth in that. Okay, here's a fact. Hope Hicks arranges this. And then you have some conjecture on either Michael Wolff's part or Steve Bannon, who gave him a quote, who says this about Trump. Is that basically how the book goes?
It is, and it isn't. So many sources are off the record, and then people just saying random things. And then there's a lot of just chapters that are profiles on certain people. So like Kellyanne Conway, he has a whole profile on her and how her job always took a back seat to her husband's. And so when Trump was elected, it was a big shock for her. Like, she had been on job interviews that whole day and wasn't expecting for this to happen. And then suddenly had to pick up her whole life. And she had to get her husband a job in the administration because it wasn't what she anticipated.
It just made me think when you said that. Do you think the FBI also has profiles on these people that work for Trump?
I hope so. I would think so. I mean, I think with Mueller in charge, they probably do. They probably have a dossier on all of them.
All of them, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So what did you walk away thinking? Did you walk away thinking this book is true, this book is fake, or this book is somewhere in the middle?
I came away with it somewhere in the middle. What I really felt like is this book is shocking and salacious, but it hits on many truths and examines a president who millions think has no interest in the nuance or responsibility of his job. And he's far more concerned with his image than he is with the actual job at hand, which is running our country. And it's not just running our country, but it's also everything internationally that we do.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so scary to me.
Yeah. It was interesting with this book coming out to kind of step back and go, okay, so we haven't talked about this yet, but what about books? Can books be fake news? And so we looked into it a little bit, and there's some interesting history there. There's actually a history of people writing fake memoirs. Have you ever heard about this phenomenon?
I don't think so. I mean, I know that people have written bibliographies about people or biographies about people that are not 100%. I mean, I remember loving Courtney Love's unauthorized biography when I was a teenage girl, but at least 50% of that isn't true either. So I could see people writing fake autobiographies for sure. You want to make yourself look good, right?
It's kind of funny because, I mean, the only difference between a biography and a fiction book is you saying this is fiction versus this is my life. And I feel like if you want to write a fiction book, write a fiction book. Don't call it a memoir if it's fiction. But I don't know if maybe it's just about people are more likely to buy a memoir, versus a fiction book, that kind of thing. But apparently this has been a problem for a while. And I have this blog here from Barnes & Noble, and it's called 7 Books That Lied to You.
Oh, is that Oprah nomination book? Remember her book of the month?
Yes.
What is it?
It's A Million Little Pieces by James Frey. So this article is actually back from October 24th of 2013. A lot of the research that I did on this is actually from a few years ago, but it talked about, goes through these 7 books. And let's talk about the James Frey one. So this is number 5 on their list, A Million Little Pieces. It says, when it turned out that James Frey lied in his book, A Million Little Pieces, Oprah, who had chosen the memoir, again, a memoir, for her book club, asked the author back onto the show, where he admitted that he was only in jail for a few hours and not 86 days. And Lily didn't hang herself, and he wasn't involved in a train accident. So I didn't read that book. Did you read that book?
I have not read that book. When he came out and that story was debunked, it left a really sour taste in my mouth. Mm-hmm. So I did not. But I will tell you a funny story about that person. When he came out with his second book, he wasn't nearly as popular. And we were living in Los Angeles at the time, and there was a free, this is how weird this story is. It was a free concert with a book reading by that guy, James Frey. Is that right?
Okay. Yeah.
And it was like 16-year-old kids playing metal for 35 minutes. They were amazing. And then he sat down and read from a book for 35 minutes.
Okay.
And I got 5 minutes in and I was like, I'm out. We're done with this. This is nonsense. I don't want to, and I'm an audiobook listener, so it's not that I mind people reading to me. I don't at all, but
not the right crowd.
Yeah, it was like this overly emotional passage from his book. And I thought, this is not maybe the right atmosphere that you're looking at. We're at a bar and we all just listen to 35 minutes of heavy metal music. We can barely hear you.
I feel like that in a couple of years, somebody's gonna be like, I was at this bar and these two women showed up and started talking about fake news. That of this really cool band. We'll be like, that's all we could get. Thanks.
I feel bad. I kind of feel like I wish the band all the luck in the world. I hope that they've had success. I wish I could remember their name right now, but if I do, I'll put it on the show notes.
Okay, perfect. Well, this one also on the list is Lance Armstrong's books.
Oh, right. Of course.
Yeah. And then another book called 3 Cups of Tea by Greg Mortensen. And somebody else, his name was John Krakauer, claimed there was something fishy about it. And there was a lawsuit later charged that Mortensen had lied about how he built the schools as well as other events described in the book. And then Krakauer wrote his own ebook in response to Mortensen called 3 Cups of Deceit. So it was kind of a little thing there. But so here's the thing. I want to talk a little bit too about this Atlantic article that I pulled up. It's called Book Publishing, Not Fact Checking. And it says, readers might think nonfiction books are the most reliable media sources there are, but accuracy scandals haven't reformed an industry that faces no big repercussion for errors. And as the picture is James Frey's A Million Little Pieces. So his is kind of the focus of this one too. So this was also written back in September 3rd of 2014. And so again, this is a couple years old, but it talks about the fact that books are not fact checked. And a lot of people don't know that. And I want to read you this. It says, when I was working on my book, I did an anecdotal survey asking people, between books, magazines, and newspapers, which do you think has the most fact-checking? And this is Craig Silverman, the author of Regret the Error, a book on media accuracy. And almost inevitably, Silverman said people guessed books. And he said a lot of readers have the perception that when something arrives as a book, it's gone through a more rigorous fact-check process than a magazine, newspaper, or website. And that's simply not the case. He attributes this in part to the physical nature of a book. Its ink and weight imbue it with a sense of significance, unlike that of other mediums. So basically, we think that books are going to be the most accurate when in fact, they are often the least accurate.
Yeah. And I think that political books, I'm not sure where people would weigh in on a political book in regards to this question, mostly because, you can have historical novels that are going to give you a good amount of information, and they might have a lot of factual information. I love a lot of historical fiction that mixes a lot of facts about things that happened during certain time periods, especially the Tudor dynasty. That's a big favorite of mine. But, I can always look back at someone like Ann Coulter, Bill O'Reilly. I mean, come on, man. They have had some whoppers. And I remember reading Al Franken's books, like what was it? Lying Liars and the Lies They Tell, or I forget the actual name of it, but it was something similar to that. And I remember reading that years and years and years ago and hearing him talk about it in his new book, Giant of the Senate, where he talks about all the fact checkers that he used. And there were a lot of sources that he would talk about, where he got those facts. That's always something to look for. There's not a lot of that in this book. There is a ton of just storytelling and conjecture mixed in with tiny little nuggets of facts or a factual setting, but that he is, like, for instance, when they're at the CPAC conference, and remember that was the big turning point for Trump, that he gave a good speech, and is this the president we've, anytime he ever gives a...
No, I didn't remember that because there's too much fucking crazy in my head to remember.
And that's the thing is, every time he would give a good speech, people would say, oh, it's a turning point. This is the day he became our president, blah, 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 shit, whatever. And there is this conjecture of Bannon saying things, and they always call him Jervanka. It's Jared Kushner and Ivanka. And him taking everything personally, and things like Rebecca Mercer was there and she sipped her tea, smiling confidently at her homeschooled daughter. And I just felt like there's no way you could know Jared Kushner's inner feelings during the CPAC conference. There's no way that you can know exactly what Rebecca Mercer is feeling. There were things that he said that I felt really went out of the boundary of decency. There is not a lot of information out there about the elder Mercer. Is it Robert Mercer?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of information. There's not a lot of interviews, but he just clearly paints him as autistic. And I don't feel like that's okay. I don't feel like that's fair. I have a child who's autistic, and we are very open about that. But unless someone has come out and told you that they're autistic, you can't do that. You can have your suspicions about people, but you don't put that on paper and just assign a diagnosis to someone. He didn't do that to Trump. He never clearly says in the book, he thinks he's crazy. Matter of fact, he said in an article from today in The Guardian, the fact checker's guide to Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury, he said, I don't know if the president is clinically off his rocker. I do know from what I saw and what I heard from people around him that Donald Trump is deeply unpredictable, irrational, and at times bordering on incoherent, self-obsessed in a disconcerting way, and displays those kinds of traits that anyone would reasonably say, what's going on here is something wrong, which is fair. It's not fair. As much as I don't like Robert Mercer, and I don't, he is a conspiracy theorist. He is a billionaire who has made money in shady ways by learning how to game the system. I don't agree by just dismissing him as being on the spectrum. I feel like that's
Does he say
irresponsible.
Yeah, that he thinks he's autistic? Oh, wow.
He doesn't say it that he's autistic. He just makes this broad statement that he is on the spectrum, which anyone who has dealt with autism knows that means that and it immediately pulled me out. And I thought, that's gross. You don't do that. Yeah. You don't try to diagnose someone else's child. You don't try to diagnose a human being that you don't know well enough to say that about. And you're not a psychiatrist.
So it sounds like this book was definitely not fact-checked.
It doesn't sound like it to me. I mean, there are multiple spelling errors. The first thing I actually saw about it was a tweet from Roxane Gay, who wrote Bad Feminist. She was just critiquing the fact that, 4 days early should not have meant this many spelling errors. It needed a lot better editing. And maybe
Right.
they do. Maybe they do it in the last couple of days before they put it out. But you would think that they would have the book printed before it even comes out. So that's troubling.
Right.
That it was so anticipated and still yet missed all this. I mean, there were things like the name Hillary was spelled wrong on one. I mean, PolitiFact's article that they put out where they were talking about the factual inaccuracies, they didn't cite a lot of stuff, but it was mostly things like, in one instance, he writes the word pubic and it should say public.
I know.
Those are very different words.
So this is from PolitiFact, and it's an article called A Fact Checker's Guide to Michael Wolff's Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House. And this was published on January 9th. Right. So a couple of days after the book came out, they were able to put this together. And he had talked about Speaker of the House, John Boehner resigned in 2011. It was actually 2015. The quote about Trump not knowing who Boehner was when he had tweeted about him prior to that.
I still think that's a possibility. He is not necessarily got the best memory banks anymore. From what we've seen. So right. I think it's possible that he didn't remember who Boehner was.
I thought, so when I read about that, they said that the guy had said Speaker Boehner instead of John Boehner. And so I thought maybe he was just confused about who he meant because he said Speaker instead of John. And, so it's very possible that Trump did say who's that, but that he obviously knew who John Boehner was as a person. Right. And then they mentioned that Wolff said Wilbur Ross was Trump's choice for labor secretary. It was actually commerce secretary, which, is an error and it should have been caught, but it's probably not like the end of the world. Right. He misspelled Hillary for Hillary Rosen, and then many, many typos. Right. And then he reported that Washington Post reporter Mark Berman was at the Four Seasons breakfast when it was likely another person named Mike Berman. So... And then it sounds like he talks about the Steele dossier as that basically Trump was being blackmailed by Russia.
I mean, he was doing more of just
restrained.
He should have pulled back on that. I agree.
So in here, just so our listeners know, so it says a more restrained interpretation of the dossier suggests Trump could be subject to blackmail, but that he was not an actual victim of it. So that's where they're saying that difference is.
Well, and we don't know. To me, the worst part about it is a lot of the supposition, just things that he just seems to want to be true. And so he sort of guides the story in that direction. There's a lot of storytelling feel to it, a lot of sensationalism. It's very tabloid-esque. I certainly wanted to keep reading it, but there were definitely parts where I felt gross reading it. Like I'm obsessed sometimes with teen moms because right. I was pregnant at the same time as the original Teen Mom. So every once in a while I go and check on their gossip, and it's like the only reality thing that I ever really cared about. And so every once in a while I go and check and see what those girls are doing. And every time I do, I'm always like, this feels wrong. These poor girls. Okay.
Well, I want to bring it back around to a little bit of the research that I found about fact-checking books. And this was surprising. And so what I found, and based on these articles that I'm reading, is that basically publishers don't fact-check books. What they do is they put them through a legal vetting process. And so whereas Michael Wolff, being a freelance writer for The Guardian, would have to go through an editorial process and have an article fact-checked and everything backed up and everything like that, he doesn't have to go through that same process to publish his book. So the publishers cite lack of funds for fact-checking operations. So they were talking about that book again, James Frey's book, A Million Little Pieces. They're talking about that in this article as well. And so what they said here was that publishers often cite a lack of funds for fact-checking operations, but it's getting harder to accept that argument. And when a line-by-line magazine-style edit is unrealistic, publishers should work to clear certain key details. And they said, in Frey's case, for example, Doubleday might have verified court records as the smoking gun was able to do regarding the amount of time he spent in jail.
Right.
So again, that was one of the things that was incorrect. He said apparently that he was in for 86 days and it was only a couple of hours. So that's something that was easily verifiable, but the publisher didn't do it. So, but they do find money to put it through this legal vetting process.
Right.
So what they're saying in this article, and I'm still on that Atlantic article, is that basically they put it through a process to make sure that they're not going to get sued. But at the end of the day, nobody goes back and says, I'm not going to read a title by Random House anymore because they published A Million Little Pieces by James Frey.
Right.
It doesn't blow back on the publishers. It blows back on the authors. So the publishers don't really care whether or not it's going to go, it's going to pass this fact checking process because it doesn't matter to them. Even if it doesn't, the book's still going to sell and they're going to keep selling all their other books. That author might have a problem selling books in the future because they aren't considered trustworthy.
Correct. Right.
So it really comes down to the author. And we were talking about what you were saying about like Al Franken's book being fact checked. Al Franken himself has had a situation come up where his point of view differs from somebody else's.
Oh, right.
And I think a very important thing to keep in mind too is that even when it's an autobiography, like you're writing about your own life, your view of a situation might be different than the person who is standing right next to you. So
absolutely,
it's the view of the author, and that has a level of truth to it. But I think even if you had, even if you and I went and wrote about our experience recording this podcast today, we're probably going to have two different points of view. Just because certain things will stand out to us or certain things will have taken on a different tone or a different meaning. And it doesn't mean that either of them are untrue, but maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle between what you and I would say about it, right? Also, there's editing involved, so I can edit Kelly's words around to make her say things just how I want.
It's true. It's true.
I wish.
You have
wish
all
I
the
power. Just kidding. But anyway, this was very interesting to find out that it's not really in the publisher's interest to even care about fact checking. So when books are fact checked, they're actually fact checked by the authors, and the authors are the ones that have to pay for that. So I pulled up,
and that makes sense to me. I mean, do you feel like it should be more? Do you feel like that burden should fall more on the publisher? Because I think what you're saying is correct. I mean, the publisher is putting the book out, but it is the author's words, and they have to stand behind them as well. So do you feel, is your opinion that you think the publisher should be maybe splitting that cost? Or, what is your opinion on that?
I think it's odd that you would publish something that wasn't fact checked. I really do. Especially if you're publishing it as nonfiction or as a biography, that you're not taking the steps to make sure that it's true before you're putting it out there. Because we do have some differences today in that self-publishing is so easy now. But back in the day, it wasn't.
Right.
And that author wouldn't have been published without a publisher. So I do kind of feel like there is some sort of the buck stops here with a publisher, and that they should be looking out for the well-being of their readers, that they're putting out good things for them to read, right? Like an editor and publishers are, authors submit things. That doesn't mean it's going to get published. It doesn't mean it's good. And they're kind of the clearinghouse for, is this good and should we publish it? And of course, there's a sales side to it. They're going to look at, can we sell this?
So what you said about book publishers, from what I've seen with authors, is that very often they are under pretty tight deadlines because you send in you send in an outline or you send in a promo for a book, they say, yes, we want to publish this, especially if it's an ongoing person who's already established. They'll say, yeah, we want to publish this book. They send you in advance. You write the rest of the book. Then usually you pass your deadline. And then the publisher starts calling you and calling you and calling you. And sometimes I think that they're more interested in making sure the book is out for readers than they are in getting it fact checked, which is absolutely one of the issues with this book.
So I wanted to talk about this other article. It's by the Daily Beast, and it's by a guy named Ryan Holiday. And this one was written back in July 3rd of 2016. So it's a little bit newer than some of the other ones, but it's called Gay Talese Isn't Alone. Why aren't more books fact-checked? And it says Gay Talese is only the latest red-faced author to publish a book replete with errors. Errors a routine fact check would have caught. Why doesn't book publishing do a better job? So I guess this guy had written a book that ended up being fact-checked by the Washington Post, and he found out that there had been some problems with the facts in it. And so this author disavowed his own book and refused to promote it because he didn't want anything to do with it. Yeah, after he found out that there was some problems. So this guy, Ryan Holiday, is also a writer, and he was thinking about that as he was about to have a book come out. And so he decided to fact check his own book. So what he said is, I'm just trying to point out something that has been pointed out before, but most people still don't understand. Books are rarely fact checked. While publishers do many rounds of editing for spelling, grammar, clarity, and even legality, they for the most part defer to the authors when it comes to the validity of the material. And he said, certainly none of the books I've worked on in 10 years in the industry have been given more than a cursory check by the publisher. And then he talks about how even college papers are checked for plagiarism, but books aren't. I mean, how crazy is that?
Right.
So he decided that, he wanted to make sure that his book was good. So he wanted to put it through a round of independent fact checking. And he thought, hey, I remember in college that my professors used this system to make sure that things weren't plagiarized. And so he went on something called Turnitin, but without a university ID, he couldn't use it. So he found, though, that he could submit his book to a company of Turnitin called WriteCheck, and it cost him $101.70, which wasn't too bad. And he was able to have it submitted for them to check for plagiarism. He said that WriteCheck for the general public does not show the sources of suspected plagiarism, and the papers submitted are not added to the Turnitin database. But they did promise to check my work against 45 plus billion web pages, 337 million student papers, and 130,000 published works. So he was like, okay, cool, better than nothing. So then, even though he had used a research assistant while he was writing it, he wanted to make sure that he had somebody with fresh eyes also take a look at it and fact check it as well. So he went to his editor at Penguin, and they were like, we don't know any fact checkers, because they literally don't fact check books. But she helped him find somebody. So he hired Chris Morgan, who was a former editor for Vibe, and at the time of this article was written, was a writer for Vice. I don't know if that's still correct or not. But he's also worked freelance as an editor and a fact checker for other magazines and projects. So they settled on $1,500 for Chris to check his manuscript for him. And he told him, I want it every word checked. It was important for all literal facts to be true, dates, names, place, attributions. And he also asked that he checked assertions and claims that he had made. And so both of these things were done. And it came back that on the plagiarism front, he was cleared. Basically, the WriteCheck had come back with some passages flagged, but most of them were like quotations that were already inside quotations, or verse of Shakespeare was highlighted, but he was like, I obviously wasn't claiming that to be my own. And then
Right.
they picked up on instances of so-called self-plagiarization, where he had used his previous work in his new book. And so he was like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I wrote it. I can therefore use it whenever I want. So
Right. That makes sense.
So he didn't really make any significant changes based on the data from WriteCheck, but Chris was able to help him get some quotes right and just kind of clarify a few things. So he did find some usefulness in that. Now, after that, it goes back to the publisher and it moves on to a legal review. And then the book was laid out and designed and printed. And then this is where he found out. He says, yet even with all those eyes, not just diligently looking and parsing the words of the book, but some specifically hired to find errors, we missed something. My sense of elation came crashing down when the designer responsible for the book trailer sent me an email. He had no idea what the book had gone through, that I had been preparing this article to discuss fact-checking and publishing. He just wanted to alert me on something he'd noticed. You probably already know, he said. On page 200, there was a minor error about Tom Brady. He went to University of Michigan, and the copy lists Michigan State as his alma mater. So even with all this like rigorous fact checking that he sent the book through,
it was for nothing.
They still miss like one little thing, which if you think about it with magazine articles or, news articles, that's very, very common to see corrections at the bottom. Like they spelled somebody's name wrong or they, said something that was incorrect. So to think that books, which are not updated as quickly or as often as a news article, would be more factual.
Right. You're waiting until if they do a second run publication for any corrections to be made, if they decide to even make them, if they feel like it's worth it.
Right. Exactly. So it was kind of eye-opening to think about books in this regard, because I do think I fell into that category of thinking that books are, correct and that they would be fact-checked. Right. And you would think that with them being so finite, like this is the final version of this that's coming, it's being printed, for crying out loud, and people have to pay like $20 to buy it, that you're going to make every effort to make sure that every single thing is correct. Whereas with, something online that can be fixed like in seconds, but it's ironic that the opposite is true. The books are not fact checked unless the author pays for it. And this guy,
and I could see why that is. Yeah.
This guy paid $1,500 for his fact checker, but I saw on Twitter, there was somebody who was responding to the whole Fire and Fury thing. And he said he had just recently fact checked his book and it cost him between $100,000 and $150,000 to do. And
that's crazy.
I know, right? So it seems like fact checking can be anywhere from a couple $1,000s to a couple $100,000, probably depending on the medium, what the book is about, that kind of thing. And I don't know. What do you think?
I would love to know. Yeah, I would love to know what that person's book is about, because here's where I sort of come from this at is I know even when we were in elementary school, the teacher used to give us, and this was an ongoing thing for several years, if we could find a mistake in our classroom book, whatever the topic was, whether it was history or social studies or even some of the math books or English books, if you found an error in them, you would get extra credit.
Oh, wow.
So, even things like that, I've always known are not necessarily checked as well as maybe they could be.
Right. So I wanted to tell you about this guy named Dr. Conservative. He wrote a book. It's a children's book. And it's called Fire and Fury is Fake News, Inspirational Stories of the Trump Family.
They are an inspiration, Beth.
Yeah. And let me tell you some of his other titles. This is a series. So some of his other titles are The Amazing Story of the Obamacare Repeal, a positive and fun book for kids. This one you're going to love. Donald Trump versus the Very Angry Protesters. In parentheses, or women in funny hats.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Oh, this one. This is my favorite one. It's free now, and I'm wondering why. The Amazing Story of Steve Bannon. A positive and fun book for kids. There's ones about Paul Ryan.
Of course there are. Of course there are. So I have 2 questions, Beth. One, do you think he's a real doctor?
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think so too. And 2,
Yeah.
do you really think that these are kids' books, or do you think he's just writing for the audience that actually still appreciates Donald Trump?
Well, let me tell you this. So this is basically kids' books for when the shit hits the fan in the White House. So he's putting out like one a day. And this is for you to be able to explain to your kids why Donald Trump isn't a horrific person, right? So I just clicked on the look inside. This is for the Fire and Fury one. So this is what it says. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of people talk about a man known as Donald Trump. Well, today I'm going to tell you the story of his life. There are many lessons we can learn from his life. Donald Trump was born to a family that was in the real estate business. Real estate is a very tough and competitive business. The real estate business is where people buy and sell buildings large and small. Some of these buildings are very tall.
I still think I still think he is just writing for the base. This seems like it's right at their level.
Yeah, this is basically how to convince your children that your president isn't going to kill us all.
You know what it is, Beth? He's writing books for Trump. This is Trump's reading level.
Oh my gosh, Katie Walsh needs to get these. That way you can explain it to him. He's like a child. Here you go. Yeah, it's funny. I just was like kind of blown away. I didn't realize that these existed. These are obviously self-published. There's no way that this is like...
Are you kidding? These aren't put out by Penguin? Random House? Nobody?
No.
I'm shocked.
In fact, if you guys... I'll put the link on because it's kind of worth taking a look at the look inside to see the picture cutout that they've taken and like made look like a cartoon.
Right.
But it's, or maybe somebody's actually drawing this. I don't know. But it's pretty low budget. And by the 1-star review and the fact that it's $4, I'm thinking they're not making a lot of money on these.
Really? They don't have really high reviews? No 5 stars?
One of them has a 5-star review, but there's only one review.
Oh.
So I don't think that maybe you could take that, to the bank. So, but it's kind of funny, like, to see this overt propaganda for children, no less, that has been self-published. Obviously, these are not fact-checked or checked by any sort of moral system or editor or anything other than this person that wants to put this together and put it out there, which I can appreciate the self-publishing part of things for getting yourself out there as a new author.
Right.
But as far as facts are concerned, researching for this episode has made me appreciate not self-publishing in a way that I didn't before.
There are plenty of authors that I've seen that have, especially if you're dealing more in fiction, I have seen some really great authors come from the self-publishing world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I definitely, but to have nonfiction self-published, it just seems almost wrong on a level. But then on the other hand, the publishers aren't doing fact-checking anyway. They're just still, they're maybe looking at the legalities of it, and they're definitely editing it. So you get usually books that don't have so many spelling errors like Michael Wolff's did. So I think an important question for us to maybe ask and talk about is, so you have a book like this where you're not quite sure whether or not you can trust it, right? So how do we, as regular people, how do we know whether or not we can trust a book? Was there anything that you did for this book to see if you could trust Michael Wolff as an author?
Well, the first thing I did was I read it without knowing a lot about him, because I feel like sometimes if you know too much, it can really affect how you perceive the book in the long run. So I tried to not read too much about him. I had read that he was a little arrogant and that he was looking forward to some of the controversy around this book. And I did, right after reading it, I started looking more into him as a person. And I found an article from USA Today that came out at the beginning of last year where he first started covering Trump. And what I found from that article, and this was just an editorialized article that he did, and it's called "How Should the Media Cover Donald Trump?" One of the things that he says is, how does the media deal with a president who lets no insult pass without returning one of his own? And this is definitely a major question. And I could see how someone who seems like he's got that same ego or that same arrogant trait that I'm sure he recognizes a bit of in Trump and in Bannon. And that's probably why he got along so well with Bannon and why Bannon divulged so much of this information to him. You know,
Right.
People who think that they're the smartest person in the room sort of gravitate towards that other alpha, and they can either be worst enemies or they can recognize a predator when they see one. You know what I mean?
Right.
But one of the things he asked in that article that I found really revealing in how he wrote this book was, on top of that question, he asked, another question worth asking is how the media's reaction might differ if it were a loquacious left-wing insurgent, uncontrollably riffing and counterpunching at every opportunity. The issue may not be Trump at all, but the startling socio-political divide he's revealed. It's two nations opposed to each other, with the media almost entirely on one side of the divide. It's not so much Trump that the media doesn't know how to cover, but a social movement that sees the media as one of its significant enemies. In this, Trump's behavior, his constant tweets, his tit for tats, his free association, his high baloney quotient, are all designed to disrupt the media foe and, among other things, give it a nervous breakdown. In other words, the media is taking the Trump bait. And that's certainly how I feel like he approached this book, where he felt like he was above where the media is. He's done asking questions, getting insulted, insulting back, having this back and forth. He just wanted to find out and be an observer and report what he saw. That doesn't mean he's reporting it in the best possible light, but it does mean that that's,
Right.
That seems to be the impetus to what began this idea for the book.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Well, we better wrap it up here.
Yeah.
Because we're getting kind of long. And I have just a couple of really fun things to end with.
Yes, let's end on fun things.
So I have two Snopes fact checks here about this book. The first one is Kim Jong-un reading Fire and Fury? And it's a doctored image, purportedly shows the North Korean leader reading the book that portrays the U.S. President Donald Trump and his staff in an unflattering light. And it's like a picture of him holding the book and laughing.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is super ironic just because the whole Fire and Fury tweet was directed at Kim Jong-un. So
Right.
This is a very good satire picture. But that's what it is. It's, they took a picture of him from a factory where he was laughing and they cropped it and added the book in. So
Right.
Obviously fake. Second one is, did Mitch McConnell blow off President Trump to get a haircut?
Do you remember this from the book?
I don't. I mean, there's so much. It's so packed with these little nuggets of people who were just done with Trump or felt like he was little more than a child. The book is not really as much about Trump as it is the incompetency that is surrounding him. And he's his own little incompetent island being surrounded by other incompetent idiots. I mean, there's a few people who seem to know what they're doing, but again, a lot of that information comes from Steve Bannon. So he is never, ever, ever going to say anyone is smarter than him.
Right. And to be fair, all the reports on Steve Bannon are that he is very smart.
Yeah.
He is an evil genius. So there you go.
Unfortunately.
But apparently, Senator McConnell's office denied an antidote in Fire and Fury, supposedly illustrating the low point in Trump and McConnell's working relationship. So apparently, in the book, it says that Mitch McConnell blew off an invitation to meet with the president because he had a haircut appointment. And Snopes has listed this as unproven. And I think, here's the thing. Mitch McConnell is a turtle, right? And if you're a turtle and you have a haircut appointment and you're already halfway there and somebody asks you to turn around and come back the other way, you're like, I can't.
I
gotta keep going.
I can only go in a straight line.
Yeah, he probably gets a haircut, once every 2 years? Because that's when he can make it there. I think that's actually a pretty reasonable thing for him to blow off the president of the United States for.
Yeah, what did Snopes say? Did Snopes say that this was factual? Or did they say they don't have any way?
Unproven.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have any way to, support or deny it. So there you go. It's kind of a he said at this point.
Yeah.
So, but it was kind of funny. So, so there you go. Books can be fake news.
They sure can.
You have to be able to trust the author and know that it probably wasn't fact checked unless the author did it themselves. And I think, like you said, you can probably tell when a book is fact checked because it's going to have a lot of resources noted and things like that notated. Whereas I haven't seen an actual copy of Fire and Fury, but I don't know about the notations in the back of that book, if there's any.
Yeah, no, I don't believe there. I listened to the audiobook, but even in audiobooks, if there's a footnote, it's usually mentioned and then read out when it happens.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't see any of that. I've not heard about works cited pages at the back of the book, anything like that. So, right. I would be really hesitant that he does make sure that he thanks all the people in the very beginning for working with him and being so candid. But, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. And I don't think he took what people said to him with a grain of salt. And then you have to, on top of that, take what he's saying and how he's saying it with your own, everyone goes in with their own bias and you have to be aware of that.
Right. But interesting. I just had never really thought of books in this way before. And yeah, you really have to be able to trust the author that they're giving you the best information and maybe do some fact checking on your own before you take something out of a book and use it as fact, which is odd to say, but there you go.
Yeah. Don't be using this on your college papers as a work cited. This is not a good one to use.
And definitely don't use the ones by Dr. Conservative. I think I would take Michael Wolff over Dr. Conservative any day of the week.
Yeah, probably. Although it would probably be a bad idea to use a notation from any children's book, unless you're specifically writing about children's books. Who knows?
Katie Walsh, listen up. Hey, if you guys like this episode, Kelly, you want to tell them where they can find us?
Sure. You can find us on Twitter at Podcast Fake News. You can find us on Facebook. Same thing, Podcast Fake News. And we are also on Patreon. Do you want to tell them a bit about that?
Yeah, so we have a Patreon page, Patreon is a website where people can go and basically sign up for a monthly contribution to a creator. So we're the creators. And if you like this podcast and you want to give us $1 a month, you'll be eligible for all of our extra Patreon episodes that we create that you basically have to be a member of to have access to. So we have that. And then also, if you run across any fake news or you want to chat with us about anything, you can always email us at podcastfakenews@gmail.com. And then don't forget to check out the blog that we do to go along with the episode at podcastfakenews.com. So check us out. And if you have a moment, take a moment and rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast, because those 5-star reviews can really help us out and get other people listening.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Well, anything else before we go?
I don't think so. I think I would definitely recommend this for an entertaining read. Just remember, it's not necessarily educational.
Right. Right. All right, guys. Well, this has been our book review of Fire and Fury Inside the White House. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Fire and Fury Inside the White House. Nice. All right, guys. Well, until next time, don't forget, spread jam.
Not lies.